I believe sooner than almost anybody else I know in something. And so and that's the unique thing about me. I believe in something a lot sooner, and then I inspire people, and then we start executing it because you cannot do it alone, right?
Welcome to the Winwire, where we explore the deals that made the careers of today's business leaders. Today's episode is a little different, and our guest is an absolute knockout. Chet Kapoor, the CEO of DataStax. If that name doesn't ring a bell, maybe Apigee does. Chet led them to an IPO and $625 million sale to Google. But that's just one chapter in a career that spanned from IBM to Next Computer, where he worked under Steve Jobs early on. What I love about this conversation is how Chet breaks down leadership and his deep convictions on how to build a career, manage people, and move the human heart in business. Whether you're in tech, running a company, or just interested in what makes great leaders tick, I think you're going to get a lot out of this. Let's dive in.
So on the Peloton, as well as at Google, right? They ask you to say, what are they ask you to describe yourself, and I had two things that always I could say always running. And by the way, sometimes from something or to something, right? But always running. And the second phrase, the three words I had was believe, inspire, and execute.
I love it.
It started for me. There was a guy called Terry Opendijk, who I was talking to, who started Onset Ventures a long time ago. And now I don't even know if Onset's on, but he asked me a question. He said, what makes you unique? And if the answer cannot be looks, IQ, hard work, teamwork, integrity, you cannot say, I'm good with people. So I was like stumped, this is a hard question, right? If you've never heard it before. And now I use it with every interview I have. And I literally was silent for 30 seconds, which is a long time when there are two people. And I said, I believe. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I believe sooner than almost anybody else I know in something. And so and that's the unique thing about me. I believe in something a lot sooner, and then I inspire people, and then we start executing it because you cannot do it alone, right? And so hence the believe, inspire.
I have a genuine question about that, because I'd say to be an entrepreneur, I think you have to have some kind of optimism about you to be an effective executive. There's something about you inherently have to have some kind of optimistic perspective that something's going to work, because generally things don't work, if we're just being honest about it all. So how do you kind of balance that in a way of being like, how do you know what you don't believe in a way, if you're such a believer?
By the way, there's a shitload of stuff I don't believe in. There's a bunch of stuff I see I don't believe in. But that doesn't mean I'm not an eternal optimist. What I've learned is that it is impossible to be an entrepreneur if you're not an optimist. Right? If you're a glass half full, it'll just come to haunt you, because you need to smile when you're in the corner, right? Literally, when you're in the corner and you've got 30 days of money left in your account and you still think it's the best product ever that'll change the world and no one's giving you the money, that's when you get really, really intense inside, and do it with a smile, right? I really think about myself in the corner in the ring. And that's how you should think about it, right? That mindset is that the tougher it gets, the more intensity you bring to the table, but with a smile, because the smile matters. So that's one. The second thing is, I have this really simple rule I use. Always think of myself as being on the receiving end of me, right? So what that does is it keeps the bullshit factor really low. So when I do our Inspired Execution podcast, I always start, before we get into the whole recording, I start with just two things. One is, make sure you're addressing a younger version of yourself. And the second thing is, let's have some fun, because it keeps the bullshit factor low. And then if it doesn't pass your test, or if it passes your test, it passes anybody else's.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, but don't you inherently have to, I wouldn't say lie, because that's the wrong word, but don't you have to, in order to be someone who's constantly believing in the next phase of whatever you're building, you're believing in the roadmap, right? You're kind of telling people this is what it's going to be, or this is what it is now. You're selling them on the vision in a way. You kind of have to be able to stretch things a little and bullshit a little bit. And that's kind of a funny, opposition to what you're saying, just in a way.
Yeah. So I don't think, just to be clear, my belief is intense enough that I believe all of it. There's no bullshitting. And it's probably one of the reasons why I've had people that I worked with for the last 20 years, over 5 jobs, right? Because, and by the way, with that, I'm also very comfortable saying I was wrong,
Sure.
right? But when I believe in it, I deeply have thought it through, and I believe in it with intensity.
No, I love
And
it.
so what lands up happening is people start believing my beliefs, right? And there's a comfort that comes with it over a period of time.
Like
You
I
can
love
never
it, and I
take for
think
granted.
you need to inspire, obviously. And I mean, I guess right to kind of transition in a way, like what we talk about on the Winwire with so many top executives and leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, is these deals, these wins that change their career, and even
Yeah.
losses, right? These like inflection point moments. And I think everyone has those who's had a career as storied as yours. And the problem is actually picking those, right? Because you have enough that you're like, yeah, these ones did. And so, from all those, whether it's, on the sales side and customer side, or, obviously you've sold and IPO'd companies before. I wanted to kind of understand from you, as you think back, and you're probably looking at the person you are today, that believer, and what's inspired you to get there in a way. I'd love for you to share a few, one or a few of those really memorable deals, wins, losses, moments, and kind of give us the stakes around those if you can think back to who you were at those moments.
I remember the past in detail, but I try really hard to forget it because it's always with me. And I tried really hard not to, it has shaped me, but I tried really hard not to reflect on it too much, right? But I'll give you the quick stories. There was a time at Apigee when we were pursuing Oracle as for an OEM agreement. There was a gentleman there that we were spending a bunch of time with, and I'd known him from the past, and so in lots of mutual respect. And we got to a point where he called me and said, "Chet, I don't think you want to do this partnership." I'm like, "Are you saying this, Hassan, because we're not going to get it?" He says, "No, I don't think you want to do this." And I said, "I'll assume that you're saying that we're not going to get the partnership deal." And his take was, "Probably not, but I don't think you want to do this." And so I was like, wow, it was probably the single best thing that happened to our company because stopped living in the past and started thinking about a new future. And I went back a couple of months later and said, "Why did you say no?" And his take was, "I know you and the team is capable of so much more, and you were trying to live in the past. And this partnership is not even a percentage of my time. It's nothing significant. I'd rather you go and change the world." And that is where we went into the API management market full force. So not getting a deal was one of the best things with Oracle. The second one was, and this one somebody has this framed. We were $200,000 a quarter, and AT&T decided to do a lot of business with us, and I was negotiating the deal. It was a $10 million deal on an annual basis. We were $200,000 a quarter, so this was like 10x, and there was a lot of back and forth. I actually told them that I didn't want to do the deal because you must feel like you can walk away from something. I wrote the entire deal on a Post-it, on a yellow Post-it, the entire deal with all the numbers, and it changed the trajectory of the company in a massive way. I'll tell you a DataStax story. There was another one at Apigee when Netflix came and said they wanted to use our technology. That was like,
Well, how did you get, out of curiosity, like I think one thing that's really hard for whether you're an executive at an early stage company, founder, a salesperson, is really aligned to the point you're talking about is, number one, getting a customer, getting someone else on the other side to believe in what you're doing, because that's fundamentally what you are doing. And then secondly, it's to trust you, right? It's belief and trust at the end of the day, especially someone like you. They're saying, "Who are you? You're just a little squirt," basically. How do you, in those moments, how did you kind of think about managing that and managing that trust and managing that belief, honestly?
it's become less of a problem now just because I have a reputation and there's a halo effect that precedes. Um, And I think that was true for the AT&T part as well. They knew I was that I had a good reputation and I would do right by customers and things like that. But it always comes down to uh, in the products I build uh, and the companies I build, our perfect customer has three ingredients, right? They have the three behaviors that they do in an enterprise. If we get that, magic happens, like magic. Um, One, in no particular order, they are deeply technical because that's the game that we bring to the table. We have thought through what products are because we know customers are making decisions for the next 5 to 10 years. So nothing happens unless there's agreement on the technology and architecture, right? That's one. So that comes from being technical. The second thing is they should want to change the world. They should be mission driven to change the world because that's how we show up, right? We want to change the world. It's not just the products. We want to make products that developers love, but also change the trajectory of the companies they work for. And the third thing is they have to be deeply respected in the organizations that they work at. If those three things happen, we sing in that world. We found that person in a gentleman who was the CTO of AT&T called John Donovan. And John loved the products we were building, how we were thinking about it. He wanted to affect the world in a big way and actually was highly respected. He was CTO of AT&T Corporation. So that made a massive difference. There was another story I'll tell you about from DataStax. DataStax had missed the cloud. And so when I joined 4.5 years ago, the first thing we had to do was build a cloud product. And we went off and actually started building it. And being behind always sucks, but you can always try to make better of it because you can come up with a better architecture because now Kubernetes is played out and things like that. And we did that. And along the way, we got a customer called Temporal. And it was beautiful to see how Temporal's usage, they were a startup, how the usage has gone from, it was like, the line looks like this. Because when you're in the cloud business, you're in the consumption business. And I want to see it and I have I want to have goosebumps, right? Because I'm so happy. This is the product that we built. It is serverless, it scales and this and that. And all of it, we thought about it. And they started out as $1,000 customer, blew through those numbers, became a multi-million-dollar customer, and are happy now, right? Just that curve rocked. And so I always, every one of these things come down to not the transaction, the individual, not the transaction comes down to the individual because some of those relationships sustain over many, many, many years, like decades. But the most important thing is how the product gets used and how does it change the world they live in.
So it sounds like, just even summarize what you're saying. And this is interesting. We hear from some of our guests right around sometimes you join a company and they sell something that you semi-believe in that people need, but it's one of many things. And it sounds like to you, a major filter in how you've approached your career, at least, after you developed your initial credibility, I guess I'd say, is that you absolutely, and of course, on the topic of belief, is you absolutely need to believe and need to really understand that this product that you're going to sell will change lives.
Absolutely. Listen, man, I came to the US. I was born and brought up in Calcutta. I came here because I read this book called The Little Kingdom. And I wanted to come and work for Steve Jobs in 1983, right? And came here, went to Arizona State, became a Next campus consultant. My first job out of college was working for Next. Yeah, that is a integral part of me, right? Which is I want to do things that actually affect the world in a significant way. Absolutely believe that. And that's one of the big reasons I wanted to do DataStax because data is fucking messy, right? Just messy. And how do you get a chance to simplify it at scale? Not how you simplify it here. How do you simplify it for a company that's been in business for 100 years, right? How do you do that? And with Gen AI now, it's even more interesting because now you have better ways to make it happen.
I'm curious in a way, like, obviously you had your principles set out. Have you ever pursued any opportunities just in your long career that didn't really adhere to that belief system, where you kind of pursued a value that maybe you weren't? Um,
I don't know how to. I do flirt with the idea, just for the record, right? I flirt with the idea, but it doesn't, I don't know how to. Ultimately, it comes down to just simple things. Solving hard problems with smart people and having fun. And equal parts of all of that. And if you cannot solve like a interesting enough problem, and you don't have the right people around you and you're not having fun, then it's not worth doing.
yeah. Well, I am curious. Like, one thing when I was preparing for this, and obviously been wanted to have you on for a while. One thing I read about a little bit is how you talk about how champions don't focus on their last shot, right?
Yeah.
They are not looking at that. They're not analyzing that. They are focused like solely on how failures can teach you a lesson. And I even hesitate to use the word failure here because it's such a loaded term, and you're like, oh well, if you're learning from it, it's not really. Are there any kind of memorable ones throughout your career where you feel like you kind of made the wrong mistake and kind of the lessons, the wrong decision you learned from that?
Um, at least a billion of them. At least a billion, right? Every day. The hard part, and you know this, the hard part of leading a corporation, especially a larger one, even longer, is that you can make a decision today and you won't know whether it was a good decision or a bad decision for another 9 months or another 3 months. See, the beautiful thing about being a golfer is that you can hit the shot and know it was a bad one. The bad thing about being a CEO of a larger company is that you won't know it was a bad decision for another 9 months. And assessing it based on trajectory and this and that makes all the difference. I will tell you this. There are two things I absolutely believe in. Three things. One is statistically it's impossible. And I love what Roger Federer recently said. It's just impossible to make good decisions all the time. And Roger Federer had a really awesome thing that he said, you've got to realize no matter how good you get, 50% of the shots are going to be really bad ones. Right? I'm like, that's a great way to look at it. No matter who you are, 50% of your shots are going to be bad ones, right? So just start with that premise. You're going to make mistakes. When you make them, you have to register you made them. But if you spend a lot of time on it, it sucks because then it'll bleed into your next shot. Almost all my mistakes have had to do with people. Hiring the wrong people, keeping them for too long, and not firing them fast enough. Almost all of them. Because strategy is something you do and you can correct along the way if you have the will to correct it, right? Because there's momentum that builds, but you can move it left or right depending on how passionately you believe in it, right? You can literally like will it and move it around. People are harder, right? And they're hardened and they all have their own childhood issues, right? And you've got to be aware of them and make sure that they are flexible to what is happening in this market, especially now. Like with this Gen AI stuff, I mean, this stuff is just forming. And so if you do not have you do not have the flexibility to move around and recover, like experiment like crazy and recover fast, right? And so that's the way I think about the opportunities. But I firmly believe a lot of people get stuck, it's we always when we have an incident we do what happened, what's the root cause analysis, do all that stuff, but it's never focused on an individual. It's focused on where did we make mistakes, how do we make sure we don't do them again.
How do you kind of balance that? Because it's very easy to fall into the trap of saying we got to stick with it. People just don't get it yet. Or on the other hand, it's actually some people pivot too quickly and are like, they weren't there when it actually was supposed to happen.
So I've got a different problem than you do, which is I'm very comfortable with change. And so it's almost like, and I know that I live about 6 months ahead of where the company is, right? Because I'm going to think it through and make sure that I'm planning for the next 2 quarters. I call it a quarter plus two scenario. Um, so I have to usually tone it down because, minds are mature, multiple minds are immature. And, that's why markets are efficient over the long term, but inefficient in the short term, right? And the reason is because minds are efficient, right? And so markets are not. But over time, markets will always win over minds. Um, so that's one. Uh, so there's a little change for me. I have to think about it differently. Um, I have a very, very simple concept, which is, and I love the way Jeff Bezos say it. We actually say it a little differently, but one of his leadership principles for LPs at Amazon is that have a backbone, right? Disagree and commit. And so my take is I am happy to have a conversation with you for you to tell me why I might be wrong. I will create the space and the environment for you to do that. But the only thing is come prepared for that discussion, right? Because I am, right? So please come prepared, not my position, just about the amount of time I put into thinking through all aspects of it. And if you come prepared and you change my mind, I'll be happy to go and tell the world that, ABCD changed my mind, and that's awesome. But if you don't, and we've come to a point where we have to proceed, you either disagree or commit or get off the bus, right? And that needs to happen, and all that needs to happen in a very short time frame.
And I get that. I guess my biggest question is basically there is always going to be people who doubt your ideas.
Yeah.
And there are times where you're going to have to say, we need to keep waiting. Trust me, there's something getting there. How do you ignore the signs sometimes that things are not going well? Say, basically saying, look, we got to give this thing long enough to kind of marinate.
I actually talk about it. I talk about the fact that we thought we were going to get 100,000 signups by this day, and we've only got 60,000. And guess what? We still think we're in the right trajectory. For these reasons, we didn't get to 100,000 signups, and so what we're going to do is going to continue going. But once I see that I've got the team aligned and we're driving hard, then after that, moving the goalposts is not an issue because we'll do it transparently.
Yeah, no, I think that's an area that I struggle with that self-doubt of saying, am I just justifying a reason that things aren't going well enough right now, right? Is my data off there? Am I looking for reasons to say it's going to succeed, or am I looking for reasons to pivot around?
And as long as you are, so one of the things I do, Michael, a lot is I play both sides in my head. Why is it a good idea? Why is it a bad idea? And so
it's a dangerous game for me sometimes, though.
Yeah, but I think as long as you come prepared, as long as only one part is visible to the person you're talking to, right? What you cannot do is make both parts visible, right? And so you have to just am I going to start with yes or no, and then go from there. As long as you come prepared and you've deeply thought it through, I think it kind of works out, right? And then you have to look for signs where people are creating the passive aggressive stuff, because that's what kills companies. What kills companies is that they sit in front of their leaders and say yes and don't actually do anything about it, or do something with very little passion. That is how companies die, because of the fat middle. It's not because of the engineers working on it, nor is it the people that report to you directly, right? It is the people in the middle who kind of sort of are doing stuff, but for them it's a job. And how do you inspire them to step up and say, no, you are on a mission? I think leadership comes down to one simple thing. How do you move the human heart? If you can successfully move the human heart, you are a great leader. It's just simple. You can read the thousands of leadership books, and you can have all the frameworks in the world, but if you do not move the human heart, you're nothing but a great manager, right? Because the manager is what they manage the mind, and their subordinates' mind, and leaders actually touch the human heart and inspire people to do things that they didn't think they were capable of doing, right? Whether it's getting a deal, whether it's shipping a product, and that's what I think leadership comes down to, moving the human heart, simply put, right? And whenever you see somebody that cannot do that successfully, there are many ways to do it. There are many ways to, you can do it by being a great speaker. You can be a very good writer. There are many, many ways to do leadership. There's not just one, many of them, but it always comes down to moving the human heart. That's one. The second thing is, I firmly believe, and this is where I might come to where people that I might disagree with people. I don't spend a lot of time reading leadership books, or management books. I mostly read biographies and autobiographies, so I have a sense of, what the individuals did, especially, the ones I really want to, I really want to see what they did well. I think you can only be the best version of yourself as a leader. You cannot be, you have to lead yourself before you lead anybody else. And I think you need to be very clear on how you lead yourself. What are the habits you've created to lead yourself to be the best version of yourself? If you understand that, you can use that to actually lead other people really well. I think that the essence of leadership comes down to, do you believe in moving the human heart, and how do you become the best version of yourself to lead yourself and others?
I'm sure in the 1980s, you didn't have the abilities today that you have in leading yourself, first and foremost. Are there any kind of, I don't want to use the word tactical, but maybe tactical things or, specific things that you found were most effective over time, or those inflection points of your ability to lead yourself?
It started, or so a bunch of the habits that I have, that I do, is that actually they've been with me for a long time. I didn't think of them, just to be clear, I didn't think of them as much in the 90s, right?
Sure.
Now I land up having to talk a little bit more about this. But there are a few things, right? Put some time aside to reflect on how the day went and how you want the day to go. Right? So think about yesterday, think about today. Spend less time thinking about yesterday, think more time about spending your time thinking about today. So you're reflecting on what the outcomes were, not what your actions were. And that's really, there's a difference between activities and outcomes. That's one. Spend a bunch of time, what I would call wandering, right? Just letting your mind freely think about many things in a particular subject. Right, thinking about all the different angles and making that happen. That's something that I used to do a while ago when I used to run. I now do it. I just sit down in the morning and just think about specific things and let the mind wander and make that happen. The third thing is, be secure. Be secure, right? I mean, it is okay to take a half-baked idea, tell somebody it's half-baked, and say you want their point of view. Totally okay to do that, right? And guess what happens? If you do it the right way, you actually can make the idea better, as well as get their perspective on it, get their buy-in, whatever words you want to use, and go from there. So there's some habits that I've, the other thing I do a lot of people don't realize, and I'm trying really hard to change it, but it doesn't work. I write a lot, right? So some of my best work is done on scribbles in, like this, right? And so I have I finish one book a month, just writing through a bunch of different things. So, and so those are some ideas, right, that I think about. Those are the pieces. The last thing I will tell you, the most important thing that I've observed, and I was lucky enough in my career to be hanging around with very smart people around, because it was not just about Steve Jobs, it was the people he brought on board. Be fucking prepared. Don't wing it. Don't mail it in. Right? Just be prepared. Spend the time. Because when you do the work, it's visible that you've done the work. Right? And if you've not done the work, it's okay. Start a meeting and say, hey, I didn't read the pre-read. Give me 10 minutes and let me read it now. That is far more respectful than saying, I'm just going to I've done this for 20 years, so I'm just going to mail it in. I'm just going to do a flyby. And that's the worst possible thing, because you're being disrespectful to everybody, especially the creator of the document and the meeting.
I find a lot of those things fascinating, and probably a lot to learn across that. It's funny you say the thing about presenting half-baked ideas. It's actually something I struggle with sometimes is I'm like, I have these different ideas. Is presenting them potentially whiplashing people too hard? Do
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Right? Like, is it,
I agree.
should I keep them
I,
focused and just keep that in my mind? Cause just like it's too much.
so that's by the way, let me do a refinement. I don't do great, I don't do group brainstorming unless I have a point of view. If I don't have a point of view, I will brainstorm with an individual, but even in that individual conversation, I'll at least be 50% sure about my point of view. But if I'm doing it in a group, it's got to be somewhere in this 80% point of view. It's very hard otherwise, just super hard, right? And especially especially the kinds of people I work with, everybody is very successful. They just have, they're very deep thinkers. They're very thoughtful. They're super wicked smart. You just have to have a strong point of view. Otherwise, the conversation just devolves in 18 different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. It's just funny to me because you're clearly someone who, like you said, you believe quickly. You have a lot of ideas. You spend a lot of time thinking. That can be hard for other people to ingest. They're saying, someone behind your back says, look, Chet just said 2 weeks ago that he wanted me doing this other thing. And now he comes through this idea. He thinks I have infinite capacity. I don't have, what's he talking about? Now you might believe in both those things, right? And so I think that's a funny balance. And to your point, I guess that means just like really being honest with yourself of how much do I believe in what I'm about to present to this person? And who's the audience here? Because it needs to be the right audience of someone who knows how to kind of take in my ideas if they are half baked and,
Correct.
and
Correct.
be honest.
Correct. And you have to, that's something you have to know intuitively, right? For example, I'll give you something that's counterintuitive. John Dixon's our CFO. I've worked with him for 20 plus years. So you would say, Chet, you actually talk to Don about your ideas? Yeah, I do. And the reason is because Don has two modes. He's a great business partner, but he's also a great CFO. And so if I'm going to brainstorm with him, I'm like, Don, where your business partner at? Right? That's what we're talking about now. And so don't put the CFO thing.
That's really interesting. So you can almost set the framing of the other person too, saying, hey, I need you to challenge me today as a CFO and tell me I'm an idiot. Or the other time is, tell me why this might work, right? Or the right. It's interesting. Well, look, obviously I think there's so much interesting, actionable insights in here. One thing that I wanted to ask you, and this is something that we love to talk to, is, most successful people out there have people that taught them things over time. And, you just talked about John. Okay, I'm sure you've learned a lot from him as a mentor in his own right while you're, leading. Are there any, specific mentors or peers that you'd point to that you've really learned a lot from? And are there any kind of specific lessons or stories to call out there?
So the word mentor is a little harder for me.
Sure.
And the reason is because my father is still alive and he's going to be 89, and he's been my role model. So I've always had somebody who's in my head who talks to me when I need it, right? Whether he's there physically next to me or not. So and I know role models and mentors are different. I have been blessed to have a lot of people through my career. I can go way back, and name at least 1,000 people who have, along the way, have been very helpful for me. And there's something I've always picked up
Sure.
from everybody, and I still do. I still pick up things from a barista at Starbucks, right? Or from somebody's helped me when I go to buy clothes, or there's a bunch of stuff. I learn from the most non-obvious places that you can think of, and so lots and lots of people that I've learned from. Nobody specifically, because I'll be doing injustice to the 998 people I don't mention. But I'll tell you if you have, I think about why I've been so lucky, and my recipe is not to seek mentors. Like I said to begin with, I have a really strong role model that works really well for me. Is to lean in to learn. right? Humbly and sincerely. If you're doing that, you are not showing up as a subordinate. What you're showing up is as a colleague, but yet you can figure out a way to learn. Some of the most successful CEOs in the world, and I've had a chance to hang out with Andy Jassy, with Sundar, with Arvind, a bunch of other people, right? And they're always learning, and they're learning everywhere from everybody. And so I would just suggest, just be sincere and humble about it. And if you're there, you'll see a lot of people show up along the way, and they'll be your mentors every day.
Well, what is it about your dad that makes him such an amazing role model to you? What do you want to emulate on a regular basis?
His calmness. There are two things I strive to be more like him about, and my version of me, right? Sure. Not his version of him. One is, focused on the work like it is only the work that matters and not the results. Right? And that is hard, right? Because when you put the work in, you get tied into the result. But really focus on the work like it's the only thing that matters. And then the results will show up as they do. So that's one thing, that's work in progress for me. The second thing is this I talked about, when you're in the corner in the beginning, you're smiling. That intensity with a smile is, you can be intense and calm all at the same time, right? And how do you bring that to nearly every part of your life?
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, it's a good place to close any, although I do need to say one more thing, which is, and this is just for me, a little bit earlier, you talked about when you reflect on your day, when you reflect on your week, you talked about being outcome focused. But when you talked about what you want to emulate there, you talked about being kind of work focused as opposed to result. How do you balance those timelines in a way?
There's a shitload that we don't control in this world. There's a shitload we don't control. And so the only thing you can do is do the best possible version of the work that you possibly can. And and so when I'm reflecting, I'm looking at it and saying, did I do the best possible thing in this particular piece of my thing? And the second thing is, will that actually affect the outcome? Because I do have fiduciary responsibility, right? And so the fiduciary responsibility is an outcome, not the quality of work. But if you keep refining the quality of work, right, the outcomes will work itself out.
Yeah. Long term. Well, no, look, we appreciate you sharing your stories and insights, and I think a lot of people will get a lot of value out of it.
This has been great, man. It's been a blast. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thanks, as always, for joining us on another episode of The Winwire. We'd appreciate it if you could share it on LinkedIn or Twitter, and rate us or leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Helps others discover the show and join our growing community. Our contact info is in the show notes, including our show email. You can see all episodes at thewinwire.com and in your favorite podcast player. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.